Okay, today I will try to finish the topic of morphology. To make a short summary of what we have seen so far, we saw that morphology is the branch of linguistics that deals with words, and the unit of morphology is the morpheme. We define morpheme as the minimal unit of linguistics that has a meaning, and we define morphology as the branch of linguistics that studies how words are created and how words are formed. And words are formed putting together morphemes, although it depends on the type of languages. We saw the other day that there are languages that have a rich morphology, a rich inferential morphology, and they use morphological information a great deal, and we call those type of languages synthetic languages. But there are other languages that don't make use of morphology at all, and they are called analytic languages. For example, Chinese is a very good example of an analytical language. English is also quite analytic. Spanish is in between. It's leans more towards, because we make a heavy use of inflectional morphology. But there are languages where everything is done with morphology. Syntax doesn't play a role, because in order to build a sentence, what you have to do in this type of languages, which we call polysynthetic languages, and an example is the Inuit languages spoken by the Eskimo people in the northern areas, the Arctic areas of America and Asia. In these languages, one word is one sentence, because they have very rich processes of incorporation of all the arguments of the verb within the root of the verb and the word, and just one word is a sentence. So as in these type of languages, a verb has millions of different possible sources, because in theory we have an infinite number of possible sentences, so we have an infinite number of possible verb forms for these languages. Other languages like Spanish have fewer, because we are an inflectional language. Other languages like Turkish have thousands of word forms, because they are agglutinative or agglutinating language, meaning that each morpheme has a particular meaning. Okay, that was basically the main ideas we saw the other day, and we talked about inflectional morphology and derivational morphology. What we are going to talk about today is word formation processes. How do we create new words in the languages of the world? And in particular, we will exemplify it with our Spanish and English languages that we know best in this class. But I will try to give you also other ideas from other languages. In order to incorporate new words into a language, languages have different mechanisms. Some of them are morphological, and these are the ones we are going to explore more deeply in this class and in this particular lecture. But some of them are non-morphological, or are incorporation of words through other means that do not take into account the parts or the morphemes of the language. Just to give you an example, and this is not a very common process of incorporating new words into a language, but you could create, incorporating words into a language, you could create a word ex nihilo, out of nothing. You just create a word, but you're not basing this word on any other word. For example, this is sometimes used, it's not very frequent as I said, for brands, in branding of new products. For example, you will know Kodak, the brand for photography. This word, I think it's with K, no? Kodak, like this. This word was created out of nothing. It was not composed of, but this is not typical, okay? The creation of words ex nihilo is not a typical process of creating a new word. Another very frequent process in the languages of the world is through borrowing, taking words from other languages, okay? And this is very common, but again, it's not the most common process. We will see that there are more common processes than this. Again, it's not morphological, because when we take words from another language, we just take, and we have several ways of doing it. And in this class, we are going to distinguish between two different concepts. what we call loan words or borrowings, and what we call calques. And I don't know if you have heard the difference between loan words and calques. In Spanish, we call them préstamos y calcos. In order to illustrate the difference between loan words and calques, I'm going to give you an example. And it's one of the most popular words in Spanish, which can be used as a very good example of this difference. When you say the word football in Spanish, we all know that this is a borrowing, a loan word. We have taken this word from English. Okay, in English, this is in fact a compound. We have two parts, foot, which means pie, and ball, which means balón. Okay, and when we have a loan word of borrowing, we take into the language at the same time both the form and the meaning. Because in English they say football, like we do, we only have adapted it. Remember, they would say football would have a lateralized or velarized L, because that's how the L's in English are made at the end of the syllable. Remember, we saw that. Football, they would say. We would say in Spanish football, or football, even taking away the L, because we don't usually have many words, although we have PL, we have some words with L. But in general, we just adapt it phonologically, and of course, if the word has been for a long time in the language, we even adjust it orthographically in the spelling and everything. This would be a loan word. Now, what would be a calque? A calque is taking the concept from the foreign language and translate it and adjusted it to our language, to the language where the target language where you're going to take the calque. So in the case of football, you can guess that another way of calling football in Spanish, although it's not so widely used, is the word balompié. Why is this a calque now? It is a calque because we have taken the word from English, the concept of the sport, but we have translated into Spanish. And we have changed the order to respect more the order, the usual word order in Spanish. In Spanish, we say balompié, and we translate ball by balón and football into pie. And now balompié has the same meaning. We have taken the concept from English, but we have created a new Spanish word. This is a calque. We don't take the form, we just take the meaning, and we adjust the form and make it native. We use the native mechanisms. In this case, again, like in English, we use a compound, noun. Now, in some occasions, when we take calques, we even adjust it and make it more similar to the mechanisms that our language usually employs. For example, I'm going to give you another example of calque. You know the English word skyscraper. Okay, skyscraper is a concept that was born in the United States, in New York in particular, because that's the first place where in the beginning of the 20th century, the first skyscrapers were built. And in English, they use a compound noun. Sky is a noun, scraper is a noun. Now, we didn't borrow the word, we brought the concept and we made a calque, we created a word into Spanish, but instead of having a noun, like we did with balompié, where we had noun, we translated it into a more common way of forming compounds in Spanish. We use a verb and a noun. Anybody can tell me how we translated skyscraper into Spanish? We use rascacielos. And why did we use this way, rascacielos, with a verb plus a noun? Because this is a very common process in Spanish, very frequent to have verbs and nouns, whereas in English it's not so frequent. We will talk about this a little bit later. So loan words is a good way, a very common process of incorporating new words into the language. When we borrow from other languages, we not only borrow words, we can even borrow other elements. We can borrow syntactic constructions, and even we can borrow morphemes. And I'm going to give you an example, and I will assign you an assignment about this. You know this morpheme from English, no? ing, ing. Ing is a morpheme in English that you find in order to make the gerund of the verbs, love, loving, play, playing, work, working, okay? You use this ing form. Also, it's very frequent to use this ing form to make some kinds of nouns that have to do with actions and sports, no? And we have borrowed into Spanish many of these ing words from English. I'm sure you know words like meeting, no? And we have meeting in two different ways. You can write it like this with original English spelling, but we also have it like this. And this indicates that this word meeting has been borrowed into Spanish twice. This one, meaning political rally, was borrowed in the 18th century from England, okay? And even we know that this was borrowed earlier because it has been adjusted into Spanish and even into the morphology of Spanish. Remember what we said about the plural of Spanish nouns? When a Spanish noun ends in en, we add es. So the plural of meeting is meetines. Okay, it has not totally adjusted into Spanish. However, this word that is written like that, like in the original English, which is used for maybe business meetings or even sports meetings, okay? We have borrowed it more recently, and it still keeps the English word inflection allomorph of the S, okay? We say los meetings in this case. So you see, here is a word that we have borrowed twice, and they have two different meanings. And now, but my point with this ing is that we can claim, and I'm going to assign to you, and I'm going to give you many of these ing words, and you can claim that Spanish nowadays is incorporating this morpheme. And I will ask you to explore how is it possible that Spanish incorporates a morpheme. It's usually the case that you borrow words, but how is it possible that we can also borrow a morpheme? And we know that we already have a morpheme in Spanish because we have created new words. I'm sure you all know what puenting means, and I'm sure you all know what Vueling as a brand means and how it has been formed. And I'm sure you all know what tumbing and soffing and compring. There are many of these words that are usually used sometimes as a joke or in commercials. But we are creating new words with this morpheme, and in Spanish it has acquired a special type of meaning. So we can borrow not only words, but also we can borrow morphemes. And I'm going to give you an exercise where you have to discover how is it possible that you can borrow a morpheme from another language. But as I said, long words, although the influence from one language into another and the kind of borrowings that we can have is a really frequent process, and you can claim, for example, that in English, 60 or 70% of the vocabulary are long words, many of them from French and from Latin. Nevertheless, borrowings and long words is not the most common process of incorporation of new words, of neologisms, of new words into a language. The most common processes are what we call in linguistics word formation processes. And this is what we are going to be talking about in this class mainly. The first word formation process is what we call derivation. Derivation. The second word formation process that we're going to talk about is compounding. Then we will talk about different types of shortening. And then later we will talk about other types of ways of incorporating new words, but they are not, again, not morphological, and they shouldn't be considered word formation processes. But let's start with the two most important ones, derivation and compounding. Remember that we talked the other day about the difference between inflectional morphology and derivational morphology. And we said that inflectional morphology studies those kinds of morphemes, those affixes, prefixes, infixes, suffixes, that give us information about the grammar. They don't change the word, they just give a grammatical form, like for example a verb in a different tense or different person, a different number. But in derivational morphology, we said that are those processes where we have prefixes, suffixes, infixes, and we create a new word. Okay? So derivation can be defined as the word formation process, where we take a root of a word, okay, and we add either a prefix or a suffix or a circumfix or an infix, and we create a new word. Okay? So we take a root and we take some kind of affix and we create a new word. And usually, as we said the other day, we usually change, well, obligatorily we change the meaning. We many times change the category, and so from verbs we can create nouns, from nouns we can create verbs, so from verbs we can create adjectives, so from adjectives we can create adverbials. And the difference between derivation and composition, or the process of compounding, of making compounds, is that in the case of compounding, we have the combination of two different roots. Like in the examples we saw earlier, balompié, we have noun, or rascacielos, we have verb and noun, and we combine the two roots and we create a new word. Now the very basic thing I'm going to say between the difference between derivation and compounding is that although in many cases this distinction is very clear, because it's very easy to distinguish what is a root from what is a prefix or infix or suffix, and so it should, apparently it seems logical, it seems very clear to distinguish between derivation and compounding. In most instances we can tell compounds from derivational words. In some occasions we are in a gray area, and also in some occasions, and because of the history of the languages, and because languages are changing all the time, and because it is very frequent that what at one point might be a root and might be a different word, with time they become a prefix or a suffix, sometimes we are in a gray area and it's not clear whether something is a compound or a derivation. And I'm going to illustrate this with two examples, one from English and the other from Spanish. If you take all the adverbs in Spanish that end in mente, and you have adjective, you add mente, and this is, you create an adverb. That's a case of derivation, or is it a case of compounding? Nowadays, you would tell me it's a case of derivation, because you consider that mente is a suffix that takes an adjective and turns it into an adverb. But if you look at it historically, in reality, mente is the same word as mind in Spanish. And so originally this was a noun, this was an independent word. But with time, this independent word has become a suffix, and therefore nowadays we talk about derivation, although originally it was a compound. Okay? The same, although this is more obvious to see this change, is what happens in English. what is the equivalent to mente in English? How do you form from an adjective? You form an adverb in English. You add, if you have, for example, the adjective frequent, how do you make frequent into an adverb? What do you add? You add li. Okay? So you would say that this li is clearly a suffix, and clearly we have an example here of a derivation. Nevertheless, if you study historically where these frequently words come, or also this li in English, mente we only use with adjectives to form adverbials. But in English, this li we also use as a suffix added to a noun. For example, the noun friend, you add li, and what you create? You create an adjective. So you have two functions for this li in English. One, from an adjective, you create an adverb. In another one, friendly, you take a noun and you create an adjective. Okay? Now, where does this li come from? Originally, this li was like, which is nowadays would be like. No? So, in a sense, this friendly comes from friend like. Okay? And originally, this like was another root, so it was in its origin a composition. But with time, this like has lost, it was originally like, and before it became like for the word, it lost this ending, and this became li, which was originally used to create adjectives from nouns, and then later, much later, got this meaning of becoming an adverbial. So originally this friendly or frequently was something like friend like or frequent like, okay, and it was a composition. So these distinctions between derivation and composition is not so clear. We have another instance, probably you have seen this in Spanish language classes, with all the prefixes that are equivalent to prepositions. Like in Spanish, we have many prefixes like con or in or trans that originally are prepositions. How do we treat this combination of preposition plus any other root, noun, verb, or whatever it is? Originally, it would be treated as a composition because we would think of prepositions as a root, but some authors prefer to think of them as derivation because they consider these prepositions as prefixes, not as whole words. Okay, but I just wanted to cover these two types of word formation processes, derivations and composition or compounding. Now, which one of the two is most frequent in English and which one of the two is most frequent in Spanish? Anybody can give an idea? Which of the two, derivation or composition, is most frequent in Spanish? And which one is more frequent in English? Any idea? Because English is a Germanic word, it makes a lot of use of composition, of compounding. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples so that you see. In English, it's very common to make compounds with any noun. You say race, you add horse, and now you have a compound, race, horse. Or you can do the opposite. You can have horse, and you add race, and now you have a horse race. Now, what are we talking about here? Here we are talking about a horse, because in English, usually the noun, the nominal, the nucleus of the noun phrase comes at the end. So we say race horse. If here we are talking about a race, we are saying horse race. How would we build this in Spanish? We don't use compounding. We use the syntax. We use a more analytical process. We don't use the morphology. We use 3 different words. In Spanish, for this one, how would you translate this into Spanish? Racehorse? Caballo de carreras. So notice we use the syntax. How would you translate this? Horse race? Carrera de caballos. Now, English is making compounds all the time, and English makes very, very complicated compounds. I'm going to give you an example. In English, you can have wind, shield, wiper. Now, if I ask you, how do you analyze this word in English? First, you would say, okay, we have wiper, no? Because this is what we are talking about. We are talking about a wiper, okay? And we combine this with this whole noun, which is windshield, which at the same time is the product of a composition of 2 nouns. Now, how do we translate this into Spanish? This is a part of a car, very important part of the car. Now, in English, they use noun, 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 noun. No, wiper, windshield. Windshield is, okay, good. Pedro, very nice answer. Windshield is parabrisas. And now what have we used here? What is this? Is this a noun? This is a verb, the verb stop, to stop, but, okay? And this is a noun. And now we have parabrisas, we have a noun, which is the windshield. And now how do we form in Spanish windshield wiper? Windshield wiper? Limpia, so we add another verb in front to the noun, limpia parabrisas. Okay, in Spanish, we have, again, this is a calc from English, we have taken this into Spanish, but in Spanish it's not so common to have these very long compounds and so frequent, and we use different processes, okay? So in English, it's more frequent to use compounds. In Spanish, it's more frequent to use derivation. Can anybody think of type of derivation that English does not have, or where we use? So, for example, although English has this eri, but doesn't use it so much as in Spanish. We have this ería, no? And we have words like panadería, carnicería, pescadería. So any store where you sell any kind of thing, churrería, freiduría, well, freiduría is not ería, but anyways, zapatería, anything you can think of, you can have the store that sells these things, okay? Also, we have in Spanish, very frequent, and English doesn't use it so much, many derived words that are formed with diminutive suffixes or augmentative suffixes, no? Which diminutives do you know? Here in Andalusia, we use ito, illo. In other places, sometimes we use in, although this is ico. In Eastern Andalusia, this is more frequent, ico, okay? And also in all the east of Spain, they use this ico more frequently than illo and ito. We have any word, we can make a diminutive. Silla, sillita, mesa, mesita, gafas, gafitas. In English, little children use diminutive, like doggy, daddy, kiddie, but older people only have mommy, daddy, and the rest of the words have disappeared. They don't use diminutives so much. So we have a lot of morpheme, a lot of suffixes, a lot of derivational processes that, for example, you don't find it in English, although English uses derivation a lot. English uses compounding a lot, even more. Spanish using derivation more than compounding, but we also use compounding a lot. So, because these are basically the most frequent word formation processes in all languages of the world. Okay? Let's go now to shortening. Are shortenings frequent in the languages of the world? Yes, they are very frequent. And we can distinguish several types of shortening. The first one we can call clipping. Why do we use shortening a lot? Why do we say things like tele, uni, profe, boli, bici? Why do we do that? Especially young people, although it's used. Why do we say fin de instead of fin de semana, and we make a shortening? Although it doesn't make, grammatically, fin de doesn't make a lot of sense. But people, even though it's 3 words, we just created one with fin and de. Why do we do that? Anybody? For language economy. No, we shorten the word so that we don't have to spend so much time. There is no need to say fin de semana when we all understand if we say fin de. There's no need to say televisión if we say tele and we understand it, or profesor, or universidad if we can say uni. Okay? So this clipping, just cutting the words, is a very frequent process in the language of the world. Another type of shortening, which is more morphological in nature because it's a type of derivation, is what is called back formation, or we also call it backwards derivation, or in Spanish we call it derivación inversa. Can anybody think of an example of a back formation? I'm going to give you an example that you have not probably heard, but I have heard it at least once. It's a new word, okay? Now, how do you call this? What is inside here? How do you call it? How? Pañuelos de papel. Another word that is more... yeah? Pañuelitos, but what else? Kleenex. Okay, where does Kleenex come from? You know where Kleenex? So we use, and it's written like this because it's a brand, okay? And it finishes in X. But how do we pronounce the S, the X? We pronounce it as S, no? We say Kleenex, los Kleenex. ¿Me pasas los Kleenex? Okay? Now, if I tell you the following. Sí, aquí tienes un clean. Well, you laugh, but you understand what I mean, no? Why do you understand what I mean? What have I done to create the word un clean? I have imagined that this is the plural, and it's not the plural, because this is the name of the brand. And I have taken away the ES and have created the singular. But this is not normal. Normally, first I have the singular, and then I have the plural. But in this case, I'm doing it backwards. That's why we call it back formation or derivación regresiva. You find it funny, but this has happened sometimes in the languages of the world. And I can give you a couple of examples from English, where exactly the same process happened. And I'm sure you're going to understand these examples. How do you say in English cereza? Cereza, we say cherry. Now notice one thing. Cereza, cherry. They look similar, don't they? Originally, they are the same word. In English, they got this word from the French cerise. And the French probably got it somewhere from the East. I don't know where this word comes from, probably from Persia or via Arabic. I don't know the exact origin, but cereza and cerise were the same word. Now, what happened in English? How cerise became cherry? Precisely by this process of back formation or derivación regresiva. People thought that this S, which was part of the root, and in Spanish we have it as the root, cereza, was a plural. And why was that? Because like clines, usually cerezas or cherry come together, many of them. Okay, so if you want to pick one, you would say, if you had cerise, you would say, oh, give me one cerise. And then from cerise, you had cherry. Okay, you understand? So people thought this was a plural, and they took away the plural, but it was a mistake, it was a wrong analysis, it was a misanalysis, something that people did wrong. The same happened with the word pea in English. You know what pea is? How do you translate that into Spanish? They are small and they are green. They are guisantes. Now guisantes usually come together, there are many. Originally in English was this word, peas. Okay? And what happened is people thought that this was the plural and they eliminated the S, and that's why we have nowadays P in singular. Okay? So this is back formation. Another example of back formation. This is going to be interesting. You know the word laser? In Spanish, it's a borrowing from English, láser, we say in Spanish, but in English they say laser. Anybody knows where laser comes from? It's a type of shortening, but it's a shortening that in English we call acronym. You know what an acronym is? Do you know how we say acronym in Spanish? Acronym? How do you translate acronym into Spanish? No? There is a word called acrónimo, but it's a false friend, a false cognate. It has a different meaning, and I will explain later. How do we translate acronym in Spanish? Sigla. Okay, the good translation of acronym into Spanish is sigla. So laser was an acronym. That was the origin. Anybody knows where it comes from? It was light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Okay, light like radar. We have many acronyms. Why do we have so many acronyms? Again, for language economy. It's easier to say laser than not to say light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Okay, now one thing. This ER is not a suffix. It's part of the acronym. Okay? But what if the people think that this is a suffix and they create a verb? Laser, lace. They are not using the usual ordering of derivation. Usually you have work, worker, love, lover. Usually you have the verb, and then you have the ER, which is the agent or the instrument, cooker, in that case it's an instrument, okay, that derives from the verb. Here we do the opposite. From laser, which is the instrument, we create the verb, to lace. So this is a back formation or derivación regresiva. It's a type of shortening. Again, it's a product of a wrong analysis, of a misanalysis, but that's how language works. You also have a word like burglar. You know what burglar means? That's ladrón, no? And originally this was first, and then they created the verb to burgle, which is to steal. Okay, and there was a back formation again in this particular case. So back formation is not that frequent. In Spanish I cannot find many examples. In English there are quite a few, but it's interesting. It's the process of a misanalysis of a word and create it in the wrong order, okay? But even though it might be something that is wrong, like saying clean, and why you laughed before, if you say clean is clean, you say, oh, that's ridiculous. But if all the speakers of the language decide to call this a clean, un clean, because of this back formation, of this derivación regresiva, you have to accept it, okay? And nothing would happen because it has happened in English and it has happened in many other languages. Now, how do we translate acrónimo in English? In Spanish we have the word acrónimo, but anybody can tell me the difference between sigla and acrónimo? They are both a type of shortening, but in sigla we take many words and we take the initial letter of each word, no? And we make a sigla. In acronym, we take more than the initial. We take maybe a syllable of each word, or maybe, and this is more frequent, at least in English, we take the beginning of one word and the end of the other, and that's an acrónimo in Spanish. But in English, when you have the beginning of a word and the end of another, you call it blend. Also sometimes it's called portmanteau word, but blend will do. Can anybody give me an example of an acrónimo or blend, which is different from acronym or sigla? Olvido, you said the word acrónimo. You remember any example of acrónimo? Any example of acrónimo? Have you heard the word branch? Anybody knows what branch is and where it comes from? What is branch? Nobody?
A mix between a breakfast and a lunch.
Okay, we have breakfast and lunch. And what have we done? We have taken the two first sounds of the word breakfast, eliminate this, and the final part of lunch, and that's an acronym. We put the beginning and the end of one word, and we create a new branch. Anybody knows any other of these? This is very frequent, and we use them in English and Spanish. You know where the word Spanish and English word motel come from? It's a type of, a motel is a type of hotel. What kind of hotel? It's a motorist hotel. It's a hotel that you find in the roads, no? Because it's for people who are driving and they need to stop. They have to stop in the motel. Now not so widely used, but before in the 70s, you know what smog is? It's the combination of smoke and fog. It was a kind of pollution. For example, in Los Angeles in the 70s, there was this combination of the smoke from the engines of the cars and the fog, and gave you this smog. Okay? So this would be blending. Now, another type is not a shortening, but there is another type of derivation which is called zero derivation, or in English they tend to call it, probably you will study it with this term, conversion. Can you imagine what a zero derivation is? Zero derivation is simply to have a word and without adding anything, just create another new word. Can we do that very frequently in Spanish, or we do that more frequently in English? Why do we have zero derivation more often? Take, for example, in English, if I have the word fish, which is a noun, how do I make a verb from this noun? Fish, to fish. Do I need to add anything? No, I don't have to add any morpheme. If we have to do that in Spanish, let's take a borrowing from English into Spanish. if I have the word, Twitter, we have tweet. I'm going to send you a tweet. Voy a enviarte un tweet. How do we make the verb from tweet? Tuitear. In English, if I have tweet, how do I make the verb? To tweet. Again, in English, it's zero derivation or conversion. In Spanish, we have to use normal derivation because from nouns into verbs, we have to add a suffix. We have to add ar or er or ir, okay, to create a new. We have some conversion in Spanish. Can anybody think of a word that is a particular class, for example, a verb, and then it becomes a noun, or a verb and it becomes an adjective, and then an adjective becomes a noun? We have some cases, but it's not very frequent. We use conversion, for example, from infinitives. If we take an infinitive like cantar or amar, how do we turn them into nouns? We just have to add the article, el cantar, el amar, and we have made it into a noun. That's conversion. That's zero derivation. Or if we have, take for example the verb parar. If we use the inflectional morphology of parar and I want to create the past participle, we say parado, hemos parado, he parado. Okay, that's a verb. Now how do I create for a participle an adjective? I can say, oh, eres una persona muy parada. That would be an adjective. And now from adjective, we can create it into a noun again. El parado, los parados. Okay? Here we have zero derivations in Spanish. We have them with participles, we have them with infinitive of verbs, but apart from that, we don't have it that often. In English, it's very common to use one word and use it as many different classes. Okay, so these are the main word formation processes that we have in the languages of the world. Now, we also have to distinguish these word formation processes from some morphological processes that we have in the languages of the world, and some of them are frequent in a language, but others are not so frequent. So, for example, when we have talked about derivation, we have talked about affixation, about adding prefixes, suffixes, infixes, but some languages of the world may not use affixation, but they may use redapplication. So, for example, in order to say in Spanish, if we say the plural of book, we say books. In some languages, instead of saying books, they would say something like book, no? Reduplicate the root, and that gives me the plural, or gives me a repeated action, a different aspect, or it gives me a new kind of word, okay? Reduplication is very frequent in some languages of the world. Other languages of the world, instead of using affixation, prefixes and suffixes, use what we might call vowel alternations. This is typical, for example, in Semitic languages like Arabic or Hebrew. They usually have roots that have 3 consonants, and now you change the vowels, or you add some prefixes also and change the vowels, and you get different forms. I'm going to give you an example so that you understand it. If you have, for example, the root, if you have studied some Arabic, you know that KTB is a root that is used for reading or book. For reading, you usually have the form kataba, which would be like he or she read in the past, and this is the form that they use to express the verb, okay, kataba. But if you change the vowels, kitab, you have book, okay, so you change from leer, read, to book, and you don't add prefix or suffix, you just change internally the root, okay, and this is how the Semitic languages work. They have a process whereby you change the vowels, and that makes morphological changes, and you can even use it to derive new words, okay, and also inflectionally, you use it a lot. So we have some processes that other languages might use tone differences or stress differences, and we use this in Spanish, not so frequently, but we have something like íntimo, intimo, intimo, or término, termino, terminó, okay, where we change the accent and we change the type of word. In English you also have it. What's the difference between present and present? Record and record. What is the difference? Present and record are nouns. Present and record are verbs. So changing the accent, the stress syllable, you change the kind of word that you have, nouns into verbs, okay? In some other languages they might use tone to make as a morphological process, okay? Okay, in order to finish today with the topic of new words into languages, besides these morphological processes that we have been talking about, there are other mechanisms that explain how language incorporates new words. And in some cases, you can incorporate new words by taking an older word and adding new meanings. How do we do this in languages? How do we add new meanings into words? And what kind of processes explain this? And I'm going to give you just a few phenomena so that you understand them. I'm sure you all have heard of taboo words and euphemisms. Anybody can explain to me what these two concepts mean? Taboo and euphemism? What is a taboo word or a taboo topic? Taboo word is a topic we don't want to talk about. Can you think of examples? Where do we have lots of taboo words? We have taboo words, things that have to do with sex, with sickness, death, okay? So we don't want to talk about these taboo issues, and so we find euphemisms. What are euphemisms? We also don't want to talk about bodily fluids or disease, so we try to avoid these taboo words or things that are connected with our bodily functions, and that's why many words become taboo very easily, and we have to find constantly new euphemisms. I can think of these words in Spanish. If I say to you, retrete, excusado, váter, isn't it true that they sound very like dirty? True or not? Do they sound like dirty words? Retrete, váter, I don't know if you know excusado, but retrete and váter. Do they sound dirty, yes or no? Yes? Okay. But do you know what váter means and where it comes from? How did we get váter into Spanish? How did we get váter into Spanish? Anybody? Where did we get váter from? Váter? What does it mean? What does váter mean?
I have always thought it comes from water in English.
It comes from water, from an acronym which was water closet, WC. Have you seen this, WC? This WC they gave in Spanish váter. So this means water. How can water become a dirty word? How can it become a dirty word? If water, there's nothing so clean as water. It becomes dirty because we associate it with this particular object that we don't want to talk about, or that we change the words all the time. What do we use nowadays? We say aseos, baños, servicios, no? We keep changing these words because as soon as we use them, they become dirty and taboo, and we don't want to talk about them, and we change them. And constantly, the same things happens with the sexual organs. And look at this word. You have the same in English and Spanish. Periodo or period. How is periodo and period an euphemism? Why do we use periodo? If you think about it, or period, it's a stretch of time, no? That's a periodo, period. Why do we use it for women? Every month they have el periodo. And why do we use this? Because we don't want to talk about it directly. We don't want to talk that it involves blood, that it involves, and so we prefer to use a euphemism, a general word that doesn't mean anything, okay? And that way death, you said death. How do we talk about death? We don't refer directly to it. Also some animals in some places, I don't know, it's not so common, but before you have many words for snake, serpiente, bicha. We have many words because it's a reality we didn't want to talk about, okay? Also we had, some people don't like to talk about cancer. They don't want to use the words for disease, and they try to say other words in order to, so this is a very important way that through taboo we get new words using euphemisms. Another type of process that we use a lot to create new words is what we call eponyms. Anybody have heard this word? In Spanish we have the same word, epónimo. What is an epónimo? Epónimo. 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 We have used some in this class, and I'm sure you have used many in your history of students. You know where hercio, hertz, remember we used this word? Hertz is the unit that we use to measure frequency, no? Hercios is cycles per second. Like vibration of the vocal folds produces a wave that has a frequency of 100 or 200 hertz, 100 or 200 hercios, cycles per second, vibrations of the particles of air per second. Where does hercio comes from? Where does Julio or Newton, they all are units, no? Have you studied physics? Where do they come from? Where does Alzheimer or Huntington or Parkinson's disease come from? Or where, we'll see this when we talk about brain and language, where does Broca, Wernicke, aphasia de Broca, Broca's aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia, they come, Broca, Wernicke. Why do we use these words? Why do we use the word America or Colombia? Where do these words come from? Where does Colombia come from?
From the names of the people who discovered.
Exactly. Colombia from Colomb, America from Americo Vespucio, Hercio from Hertz, a physician who discovered or talked about this measurement, Julio the same, Newton the same, Broca is a physician who was the first one to study these types of aphasias, of problems with language because of a brain damage. Wernicke is another physician who also studied a type of aphasia that affected certain patients, and these people gave them their names. So whenever we have the name of a person and it's used as a new word in the language, we have an eponym, okay? And this is a source of new words in the language. Now, so we take a word that is a proper noun, but it becomes a common or another eponyms. Have you heard of these words, boycott? And how would we form how would we derive the verb from boycott in Spanish? Boycott, in English would be to boycott, in Spanish, boicotear. Anybody knows where this boycott comes from? In Spanish, it's a borrowing from English, but in English it's an eponym. There was a certain Captain Boycott who in, I think in Bahamas or Barbados, organized the first of these boycotts and gave it his name. The same with the word linchar, linchamiento. You know where linchar and linchamiento comes from? Anybody? How do you say this in English? There is lynch. Lynch or lynching would be the linchamiento, was a judge in America, I think in Virginia, in the state of Virginia, that in the 19th century was known because he always hanged many of the criminals that went into his court. So from this lynch, you had this linchar or linchamiento, which is when people take justice on their own hands and don't have a proper trial for the criminal, no? And they kill the criminal. That's how we have linchar, linchamiento. So these are all eponyms. We have many eponyms in the languages of the world. Through history, many important figures have given name to particular places or particular actions or to particular, and we have lots of eponyms. And I'm just going to finish with probably the two most frequent ways we change the meanings of words and we create a new word, but just having an old word and we change the meaning. We do it basically using two processes, what we call in English metaphor, and the other one we call metonymy. I think this one's metonymy. So what is the difference between metaphor and metonymy? In Spanish we have metáfora y metonimia. Anybody? Maybe I think it's this one. I am not sure now. Metonymy. What is the difference between metonymy and metaphor? Anybody? Metaphor, we use metaphor all the time. For example, with parts of the body, boca or mouth. How do we apply mouth metaphorically to other realities? We talk about mouth of a river, no? La desembocadura de un río. In Spanish we say desembocadura, again boca. Okay? We talk about boca de riego, no? Or boca del metro. Why do we call these places boca, boca, boca? Because they have a similar function to our mouth, no? So metaphorically, we are constantly creating new words or using old words, but giving them new meanings. And now, how do we do it? Because there is a similarity, there is some resemblance between the old meaning and the new meaning of the word, okay? Now, how do we do metonymy? Metonyms. We don't do it by resemblance, we just do it by contact, by contiguity, because the two words, the two meanings are in some way associated. And I'm going to give you an example. If I ask someone, Dani, échame una mano. Literally, what I'm saying, I'm asking literally to Danny that he cuts his hand, no? And he throws his hand to me. But I'm not meaning that. I don't want him to cut his hand and throw his hand to me, okay? I'm asking him to come here and help me. So I'm using hand, metonymically, also a type of metonymy that we call synecdoche, a part of Danny for the whole of Danny, hand for the whole person. So you understand? That's metonymy. Also, when we talk about un Jerez, un Burdeos, champagne, we are talking about a particular product of a region. That's metonymy also. The difference between metaphor and metonymy, as I said, is that metaphor, we give a word, and a word that we already have, we give it a new meaning because the two meanings are similar in some way, and through metonymy we do it because the two meanings are connected physically, okay? They are in contact, and through this contact we create a new meaning. Now, can you understand why we have so many words, like for example, from calzas? If you know calzas, we have calzoncillos, we have calzado, we have calcetines. We have created, because these words are all in continuity, they are contiguous, and we have used the same root basically with all these different meanings. And even, I don't know if you know the word that we have today for verano. Verano in Latin comes from where, which was spring, but spring is close to summer, and metonymically you had a change in the meaning. Okay, I don't want to tire you more, I've spoken enough. I've given you basically all the ways you can have new words in a language through word formation processes, and also how words can acquire new meanings. And from now on, you can have, you can give, when you find neologisms, new words for the project that we have together in the class, and you can label them. Now you can identify what are the processes that these new words have originated from. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.